The week before my wedding, my mother sat across from me at our kitchen table and gave me everything she believed I needed to know about becoming a wife. 7 words. That was my education. The wood stove was burning behind her. I remember the smell of bread cooling on the counter and the sound of my younger brothers moving around outside near the barn. My mother kept both hands folded in her lap. She would not look directly at me. She said, "Be patient with him. A wife adjusts," and then she stood up. That was it. No explanation about what marriage would actually feel like. No conversation about fear. No conversation about what I could say if I was uncomfortable. No one told me that I was allowed to need time. No one even gave me the vocabulary to understand what I was nervous about. I was 19 years old. 7 days later I was married, and when night came I discovered just how dangerous silence can become when a young woman has been taught that silence is one of her greatest virtues. My name is Hannah. I was raised old order Amish, and I spent the first decades of my life inside a world where almost every important lesson was taught indirectly. Some things were said openly. Work hard. Respect your parents. Obey God, avoid pride. Be modest. But some of the most important things were communicated through what nobody said, and intimacy was one of those things. I want to be careful before I continue. Amish communities are not all the same. Different affiliations, districts, families, and individuals can have very different customs and attitudes. I am not telling you that every Amish girl receives the same preparation I did. I am telling you what happened to me, and I am telling you what I later heard from other women whose stories sounded frighteningly familiar. If you were raised in a home where marriage was discussed constantly, but nobody explained what marriage would actually require from you, you may understand this story better than you expect. And if stories like this matter to you, subscribe, not because my story is more important than anyone else's. Subscribe because silence survives when everyone assumes someone else will speak. When I was growing up, marriage was treated almost like weather. It was coming. You prepared for it. You did not question whether it should arrive. Not my 15 or 16. I already understood what people expected my future to look like. I would marry. I would keep a home. I would work beside my husband. I would have children if God allowed it. I would belong to a church district, and I would become one of the women standing in a kitchen someday, teaching another girl how to live the same life. What I did not understand was what happened between the wedding ceremony and everything that came afterward. Girls noticed things, of course. We watched married women become pregnant. We heard whispered jokes that stopped when younger girls entered the room. We saw newly married couples disappear into their own homes and return to church looking slightly different somehow. But questions were dangerous. Not dangerous in the way people outside sometimes imagine. Nobody slapped me for asking a question. Nobody dragged me from the room. It was quieter than that. You learned which questions made adults uncomfortable. You learned which questions earned a long silence. You learned which questions caused your mother to tighten her mouth and say, "There's no need to talk about such things." Eventually you stopped asking. That is one of the most effective ways to control information. You do not have to forbid every question. You only have to make curiosity feel shameful. By 17, I thought ignorance was evidence of purity. That is difficult for me to admit now. I was proud of how little I knew. I believed a good girl entered marriage innocent. What I did not understand was that innocence and ignorance are not the same thing. Innocence can belong to you. Ignorance belongs to whoever decides what you are not allowed to know. I met the man I eventually married through the ordinary social world around us. He was not frightening. That matters. People sometimes expect stories like mine to contain an obvious villain from the beginning. He was not. He worked hard, he helped his father. He was respected, he did not drink heavily. He was not known for fighting. People considered him dependable. My parents were pleased. I was pleased too. I remember riding home after one of our visits and thinking that I had been lucky. He seemed steady, quiet, certain. I mistook certainty for safety. During our courtship, we were rarely given language for emotional closeness either. You spent time together, you talked, you learned about one another's families, you understood that marriage was the direction you were moving. But there were entire subjects that remained closed. I did not ask him what he expected from me physically. He did not ask what frightened me. Neither one of us had been trained to have that conversation. That is important too, because when a system refuses to teach people how to communicate, both people enter marriage carrying assumptions they did not create. Only one of them may have more power when those assumptions collide. 3 weeks before my wedding, I tried asking my older cousin what I should expect. She had already been married several years. We were folding laundry. I remember that because she kept folding while I spoke. She never stopped moving her hands. I asked, "Were you scared when you got married?" She paused. Only for a second. Then she said, "Every girl is nervous." I waited for more. Nothing came. So I asked, "Does that go away?" She folded a towel, then another. Finally, she said, "You get used to being married." At 19, I heard comfort in that sentence. Years later, I heard something else. You get used. Before we continue, let us know in the comments, what city are you watching from, and what time is it there right now? And when the story is over, come back and tell us what you thought. We'd love to hear your honest review. Now, let's get back to the story. To it. Not, you will understand each other. Not, you can talk to him. Not, he should listen if you're afraid. Not, nothing should happen simply because you're too frightened to object. You get used to it. That phrase was everywhere. You get used to hard winters. You get used to waking before daylight. You get used to sore hands. You get used to pregnancy. You get used to marriage. Endurance was treated as maturity, and because endurance was praised, discomfort rarely became evidence that something needed to change. Discomfort became evidence that you needed to become stronger. The day before my wedding, another woman came to speak with me. I will call her Ruth. She was older than my mother, and she had been married for more than 30 years. She came while we were preparing food. There were bowls across the counter, flour on the table, women moving in and out of the kitchen. Ruth waited until the others had gone outside. Then she said something I did not understand until years later. "If you need a little time, stay busy." I looked at her. She kept working. I asked what she meant. She said, "Sometimes a woman can finish one more thing before bed." Then she changed the subject. That was how women sometimes communicated things that could not be said plainly, sideways, through chores, through timing, through practical excuses. Nobody said you are allowed to set a boundary. Instead, an older woman might tell you to finish another basket of mending. Nobody said your fear matters. Instead, she might tell you that headaches sometimes require an early night in another room. Nobody gave us the language of choice. They gave us strategies for delay. At the time, I thought Ruth was giving me housekeeping advice. She was trying to hand me a tiny piece of protection using the only vocabulary available to her. My wedding day was beautiful. That is another thing I refuse to erase. There was food, family, children running outside, people I had known my entire life. I remember looking around and feeling surrounded by belonging. That is what makes these stories complicated. A system can contain beauty and still contain harm. People can love you and still teach you things that damage you. Tradition can give you community while also taking away words you desperately need. Those truths can exist together. When evening came, I became frightened. Not because anyone had threatened me, because suddenly, the silence of the previous 19 years had become my responsibility to solve. I was supposed to know how to become a wife without anyone ever explaining what that meant. I remember standing near the bed and trying not to look nervous. That was the instinct I had been taught. Do not make things difficult. Do not embarrass anyone. Do not appear childish. Do not make your husband feel rejected. Be a good wife. He was nervous too. I can see that now. At the time I thought men automatically knew everything women did not. That was another myth. He had been given more entitlement than knowledge. I had been given more obedience than knowledge. That is a terrible combination. He believed marriage changed what could be expected. I believed the same thing. Neither of us had been taught the kind of conversation that should have happened before either person crossed the other's boundaries. There was no language for, "Are you comfortable? Do you want to stop? Are you frightened? Can we wait? Do you want this?" Those sentences seem ordinary to me now. At 19, they might as well have belonged to another language. I remember lying awake later listening to the house. There was wind against the window. Somewhere outside, a horse shifted. I could hear my husband's breathing. I stared into the dark and wondered why marriage felt different from what I thought holiness was supposed to feel like. But even inside my own mind, I corrected myself. "You are being selfish. You are immature. You will adjust." My mother's 7 words came back to me. Be patient with him. A wife adjusts, so I adjusted for months, then years. I became very skilled at turning discomfort into duty. I want to say something here that I wish someone had told me then. Being married does not erase your interior life. A wedding does not turn fear into agreement. A promise made in front of a church does not mean that every future moment is automatically consented to. I did not know that, and because I did not know it, I thought the problem was my inability to become the kind of wife everyone had described. The first time I tried to explain my discomfort to another married woman, she told me, "Men have needs." That sentence was common enough that I barely questioned it. Men have needs. Notice what the sentence does not contain. Women choice, conversation, mutuality, It turns one person's desire into a fact of nature and the other person's response into a moral responsibility. Again, I'm speaking about the teaching around me. I am not claiming every Amish household teaches marriage this way. Accuracy matters more to me than outrage, but in my world, the husband's needs were often described plainly. The wife's boundaries were described, if at all, indirectly. That imbalance shaped everything. I learned that a good wife did not humiliate her husband. A good wife did not create unnecessary tension. A good wife did not speak openly about private matters. A good wife did not carry marital problems outside her marriage. Do you see the trap? The system did not need someone guarding every door. The rules themselves made reaching for help feel like betrayal. If you were hurt, you protected the marriage. If you were confused, you protected the marriage. If you were afraid, you protected the marriage. And if protecting the marriage required you to disappear inside it, people could call that faithfulness. Years passed before I heard the word autonomy used in a way that applied to me. I had already left the community when a therapist asked me a very simple question. She said, "Did you believe you were allowed to say no?" I started answering immediately, then stopped. I remember looking at the floor because the truthful answer was complicated. Technically, I could form the word. Nobody had removed my ability to speak. But I did not believe refusal belonged to me in the same way obedience did. That is when she said something I still remember. A choice is only meaningful when you believe both answers are available. That sentence rearranged years of my life. Both answers, yes and no. I had been taught one answer was loving, mature, feminine, faithful, and peaceful. The other carried words like selfish, cold, rebellious, difficult, and disobedient. Was I physically capable of refusing? Sometimes. Did I believe refusal was morally available to me? That was another question. I did not have the term coercive pressure then. I have it now. I did not understand bodily autonomy. I have those words now. I did not understand that silence itself could be inherited. I understand that now too, and this is where I want to be fair to the people who raised me. My mother was not sitting at that kitchen table plotting to harm me. She told me what she had been told. Her mother probably did the same. Women can pass down rules that wounded them because nobody ever gave them permission to question those rules. That does not make the consequences harmless. Explanation is not excuse. But if we turn every person into a monster, we miss the machinery that keeps the pattern alive. My mother was part of the system. So was my husband. So was I for years. I even helped preserve it by staying silent. The framework was older than all of us. That is why breaking silence matters. Not because every tradition is evil. Not because every Amish marriage is abusive. Not because faith itself is the enemy. But because no tradition should require ignorance in order to survive. No marriage becomes healthier because the woman entering it knows less about her own boundaries. And modesty should never require a girl to arrive at one of the most important nights of her life carrying fear she cannot even name. Sometimes I think about Ruth, the woman who told me to stay busy if I needed time. I wonder what someone had told her. I wonder what she survived quietly enough that practical delay became the only protection she knew how to pass down. She could not say everything, but she said something, and I understand the courage in that now. Maybe every generation hands the next one whatever language it has. Ruth had chores. My mother had endurance. I eventually found words: consent, autonomy, coercion, choice, boundary. Those words did not destroy my morality, they helped me understand it. If you grew up anywhere, not only Amish, where nobody prepared you for intimacy except to tell you to obey, endure, submit, satisfy, or keep quiet, I want you to hear this carefully. You were asked to navigate something complicated without a map. If you froze, that does not mean you agreed. If you stayed quiet because speaking felt dangerous, your silence still had a history. If you thought marriage meant you had surrendered the right to feel uncomfortable, you were missing information you deserved to have. And if it took years before you could even describe what happened, that delay does not make your understanding less real. Sometimes the body understands long before the vocabulary arrives. I wish somebody had sat beside me before my wedding and said, "You are allowed to be nervous. You are allowed to ask questions." A good husband can hear uncertainty without treating it as rejection. Marriage requires conversation, not mind reading. Kindness goes in both directions. Your feelings do not become sinful because someone else is disappointed, and saying no does not make you a bad wife. I wish someone had told me that marriage was not the end of ownership over myself. I wish someone had told my husband too. Maybe our marriage would have been different. Maybe not. But at least we would have entered it with language instead of assumptions. That is the part people underestimate. Silence does not simply hide harm after it happens. Sometimes silence helps create the conditions where harm can happen at all. Because if a girl has no language for a boundary, How is she supposed to defend one? If she has never heard the word consent, how is she supposed to recognize its absence? If every lesson praises endurance, how long will it take before she realizes that enduring something is not the same as choosing it? I was 19 years old when my mother gave me 7 words. I carried them into my marriage like instructions. Be patient with him. A wife adjusts today. If I could sit across from that 19-year-old girl at the same kitchen table, I would give her different words. I would take her hands, I would look directly at her, and I would say, "Your wedding changes your life, it does not erase you. Your husband can love you and still misunderstand your boundaries. You can love him and still have boundaries. You do not owe silence to anyone simply because silence was handed to you as virtue. Your body is not proof of your obedience. Your fear deserves language. Your comfort matters. Your voice belongs inside your marriage too. And your no is not a failure of love, it is a whole sentence. I wish someone had told me. So now I am telling you.